Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and thank you for joining us today for this Hangout on Air. This is an episode of Learn with Michelle, and Learn with Michelle is a series of Hangouts on Air and webinars that I host that take a look at all the different and exciting ways that emerging technologies are reshaping higher education today and making our teaching and learning landscape more student-centered. And today we have a really exciting Hangout on Air that you are here to view, and I thank you for joining us. Learn with Michelle is brought to you by Academic Partnerships, and this Hangout is featuring the awesome work of Brad Belbas from Macalaster College, and I welcome Brad today. I'm going to introduce him in just a second. He's here to share with you how he is flipping group presentations, student group presentations, using a very creative blend of Hangouts on Air and VoiceThread. So this is really intriguing and thought-provoking. I kind of think about him when I look at what Brad's doing. I had some conversations with him over the past several months, and I thought long and hard, and I kind of thought about him as being like this, chef in a kitchen whipping up this special recipe with these spices and so forth. And I think that's a lot of what's happening now. It's like we've got all these new tools, and it's almost as if we as educators now need to be thinking very creatively about how to pull these new tools together and blend them in new ways to support new and engaging and creative ways to support our students' learning and improve our students' learning. So we're going to think about how Brad is taking a very traditional part of the student learning experience, group presentations, but creating something very non-traditional with it using Hangouts on Air and VoiceThread. So that's the premise of today's Hangout. So with that said, I'd like to introduce you to Brad Belbas. Brad is an academic technologist and visiting assistant professor in educational studies at Macalaster College. And with that said, hello, Brad, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks very much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for enduring this abuse for the next 30 minutes and for sharing your fabulous work with us and letting us understand some of your creativity in the classroom and take a look at what you've done and also listen to what some of your students are thinking about these innovations that you're putting forth in your class. So to get us started, I think a good starting place for the conversation is perhaps just for all of us to get our arms around, now that we have an introduction to what it is that we're talking about, maybe what your class is. Tell us about your class and also really your objectives for the activity. I know that you had some really focused objectives for the activity, so why don't you take us through that type of introductory framework to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to flip over just a couple slides here to go through that, and I like the food metaphor.
You like that, huh?
Yeah, I was thinking about mixing foods together. I was thinking of s'mores and how sometimes you get a flaming marshmallow too in there.
Whatever works for you.
Whatever works. Yes, because not everything goes perfect all the time when we're mixing all these emerging technologies.
No, that's part of it.
So anyhow, so a little bit of background on the course. The course that I teach is called Education and Emerging Technologies, and it's at Macalaster College in St. Paul, Minnesota. And for background, it's an upper level undergraduate course. This is a 100-level course. It's a small enrollment. It's a small liberal arts school, so the class sizes are very small. There were 13, started 14. There were 13 students in it this year, so it was very, very manageable to do small group work in there. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is a small group project that was about doing it was a small group collaborative research project, and the students looked at, they were exploring critical issues in educational technology and sort of where the intersections were between technology, education, and society. And in terms of the objectives, there were three principal objectives, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this because this background provides a lot of the context. But the first objective was to provide a technology-mediated version of a classroom activity that the students in this class and other students in educational studies at Macalaster were already familiar with, which is peer teaching. And the basic idea was to give them, as future teachers, the chance to take this peer teaching framework and have them experience it anew through a variety of emerging and collaborative technologies. And we'll walk through what those were and the different steps and phases of the project itself. The second objective, which is the part that's really the flipping part, pedagogically, I considered how small group presentations present two key design challenges. The first was that it was important that the presentation activity benefit all learners in the class and not just the presenters. And second, because small group presentations require a lot of class time, sometimes they can take up one or more class periods to complete, that it was important to weigh the benefits of spending the in-class time versus the potential of doing it out of class for the activity. And what I didn't mention earlier in the background of the class is that this class meets once a week in the evenings for 3 hours. It's a spring semester course, so there's only one opportunity per week to meet. So the class time that we have together is extremely valuable. So thinking about that and how we want to spend that time was very important.
So thinking about whether going back to that flipped concept, whether or not having students stand up in front of the classroom and do this kind of linear presentation for the full 3 hours, or maybe even 2 or more sessions, right? Because those group presentations take an enormous amount of time while the rest of your students are passively sitting and listening, right? Is that the best use of that precious face-to-face time? That's when the flipped model comes into play here.
Right, you're right, yeah. And it was the other part of that was thinking of how can the activity itself, not just the presentation, but the components that were related to it be designed so that it engages and benefits all the learners in the class. So really just sort of state the objective in terms of flipping. It was shift both the small group presentations and the discussion about them that happened afterwards into the virtual asynchronous environment.
Okay.
So the third objective was to establish an environment where there could be actual dialogue that happened as a result of these. Now, there's often a discrepancy between what we, the big we, the grand we, implicitly wish and expect our students to do when we assign them to discuss things, to discuss topics, whether in class or online, and what actually ends up happening. And what we tend to want is for them to have some type of a back and forth exchange of ideas. But what often results is something that's a bit less than that. Sometimes there's this, I don't mean this to sound so grim, but I sort of jokingly refer to death by agreement. There's the idea that there's an agreement with what somebody says and then an elaboration on why you agree with that. And there's a little critical engagement of ideas.
Right. The superficial back and forth.
Exactly. So the critical thinking doesn't get engaged. And then the other is the death by monologue, which is where other people's ideas generally are not considered or brought into the comments at all. So it was important to do something that facilitated actual dialogue. And there is a research literature on classroom discourse that has actually looked specifically at talk between teachers and students in technology-intensive environments. And there are two important findings that inform the way that this activity was designed. The first is that there's a particular type of talk that they identify. This is a very general type of talk that they identified as facilitating some of the most important kinds of learning. That facilitates the kind of critical thinking that happens in interactions, and it's called exploratory talk. And I'm actually going to read the definition of that. Exploratory talk occurs when partners engage critically but constructively with each other's ideas. Statements and suggestions are offered for joint consideration. These may be challenged and counter-challenged, but the challenges are justified and alternative hypotheses are offered. And so really the key is that it's important to approach disagreement. There's oftentimes we see that it's difficult to take on disagreement or challenge each other's ideas, and but it's important for everybody to learn how to do that, in particular for teachers to know how to facilitate that with students, and my students being future educators and teachers. And the second finding from this research literature that informed this activity is that there is the one important that teachers can facilitate this kind of talk occurring is by setting up ground rules and explicit expectations for how partners in these types of activities are to work together. So the hope was to be able to facilitate this type of talk with the students in the class in this virtual environment. So.
Okay, great.
Coming back to you here.
Yeah, I appreciate that you took the time to go through those objectives, because I think that they really set a very meaningful context for what it is that you're doing here, and they explicitly illustrate that it's not just about using tools, that it's grounded in very sound pedagogy, and that's important. And I wanted to kind of maybe take just a second and set this activity in a broader context. So thinking about your class, your students as being future teachers, and knowing that there's a lot of people watching this who are teaching classes that do not have future teachers in them and do not maybe teach classes that meet once a week for 3 hours. I believe that those skills that you're talking about in terms of fostering, this kind of, you discussed it as peer teaching skills. We can think about it as facilitating group conversations online, interacting with colleagues in a virtual setting, having these kinds of conversations or discussions or debates in a virtual setting asynchronously. Those are skills that are going to apply to the workforce, to 21st century life in so many different ways. So I view these as incredibly relevant skills, absolutely to future teachers, but in a broader sense, very applicable to higher education in general. And just wanted to kind of make that broader statement. And if anyone, by the way, has any questions or reflections or comments that you want to share with us as you're watching today, I have a note on the screen, but you're welcome to make those comments through Twitter by using the hashtag LEARNWMPB, which stands for Learn with MPB. Okay, that's right on the screen. So share a tweet and include that hashtag, and I'll see it. I'm monitoring that as we talk, and I can pose your question to Brad or just share a reflection if you have any with us. And the other thing was about the meeting once per week. I also think that it's important to be mindful that this strategy or this approach that you're talking about could be very applicable to teaching a blended class or fully online class as well, because this idea of group presentations is certainly something that gets pulled over into the fully online environment. And so we always want to be thinking about new approaches and new ways to stretch, to innovate, to transform these models and make them more dynamic and relevant relevant to all learners. So I just wanted to set that stage and kind of think about the diversity of the audience that might be viewing. So I'm going to take it back to you now, Brad, and ask you how you did this. And I know that you're going to now get into the meat and the bones of the design of the course and take us through some of the technologies that you applied in the design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll go back to that. I wanted to mention that I'm just really glad that you brought up the applicability of facilitating this type of talk and this type of discourse that happens to any kind of course or any type of collaborative work that students or coworkers would do with one another, because what it's really about is being in a type of working space where you're sharing, you're working towards a shared objective.
Mm-hmm.
You're not in a situation where it's my way or the highway.
Right.
But you're working towards something that you've shared and you want to get to the end. You're both invested in getting to the end, and so that sort of creates a shared investment in weapons. So you don't want to just, well, you want to be. It sets up the environment for being constructive.
Yeah, I like those terms.
So I'll go back to these slides here. Talk a little bit about what the different components of the activity were. So again, just to summarize the activity, the project itself, it occurred over several weeks, and it was a research project. The first part of which was the students getting immersed in their topic. There were 4 different topics, and they first immersed themselves in the literature. Each group took a topic, but each group then immersed themselves in the literature. They then generated an annotated bibliography using Zotero and the shared library resource that you can have to collaborate in a virtual space and to be able to work with a shared library during the process of creating that annotated bibliography. So they created that, and then afterwards, each group, after they were submitted, each group read each other's annotated bibliographies so they could learn about each other's topics. So that was the first way in which the groups were able to make the project relevant to each other. They were able to get a sense of what their research was before the presentation. And not only that, they read these annotated bibliographies and provided feedback on them. And it wasn't just sort of a critique of the types of sources, but it was sharing experiences from their own education background related to these topics. And some of these topics had to do with things like using e-texts or virtual high schools or things like that. So they could talk about things that either were from their own personal experience or from people who were close to them. And they shared them on a private Google community. Now, the idea of sharing this was so that in the next phase of the assignment, the students in each of the groups created a video of their presentation, and this was through a on-air Google Hangout. And in this Hangout, they not only presented their findings, but they incorporated the feedback and the comments and the stories and things that their peers shared here and incorporated them explicitly in this video. So they made direct connections and linkages between their peers and what was being presented and talked about in the videos.
So
and they were required to talk about them by
interject here
name.
for just one second?
Please.
I just want to just kind of be sure that I understand and those watching understand. So, okay, so the scaffolding here is awesome, and it's so great that you're showing it to us like this because it illuminates how much goes into this and that it's not just a, okay, do this presentation and do the recording. So there's the selection of the topic, the immersion in the content, the annotated bibliography that's done collaboratively with Zotero, the peer feedback that's collected. So they're the small groups of students that collect feedback from the rest of the class through the Google Plus community.
Correct.
And then I wanted to talk about the Hangout on Air. So in other words, there's a small group of students who get together in Hangout on Air just like you and I are, Brad. So let's say, how many students would be in a small group?
3 to 4.
Okay, so there'd be you and I, 1 or 2 other students, and we'd be in a Hangout on Air, but the rest of the class would not be in the Hangout on Air.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. So we do our presentation in this Hangout on Air. There'd be a visual, and we'd be presenting with our video, and then that gets archived, just like I'm archiving this one to YouTube, and that's what you're going to explain from here. Okay, got it.
Exactly, right. So they would record their video that had their findings in it, but they would also make sure to address the interests, concerns, the questions that came out of this peer feedback.
Got it. Okay.
So again, making it relevant to what their peers were not only interested in but had questions about. So it was making instruction relevant right there. Then the next piece afterwards was to then be able to have the rest of the class view and then discuss what the presentation was. And that involved taking VoiceThread and embedding or just adding the video, which is the result of a Google Hangout on-air video, the YouTube video. So it was downloading this video and then embedding it in VoiceThread. And
which is really easy to download
details
from YouTube, and a lot of people don't know that, but you just, yeah. Do you want to just, I know you don't have an illustration of the YouTube part, but you want to explain how you do that on YouTube just briefly?
Yeah. And when you are in YouTube and you've opened your account, you can click on your email address in the upper right-hand corner. It brings up the options that are related to your account, and one of them is Video Manager, and that will show all the videos that you have uploaded. And there's a thumbnail of your video and a little drop-down menu. You click the drop-down menu, and one of the options is Download MP4. So just right from that interface in the Video Manager, you can download the video that you created in your Hangout. And then once you have that, you've downloaded it to your computer. This is the VoiceThread interface. And Michelle, for people who aren't familiar with VoiceThread, do you have a real quick, nutshell description of what it is, so that
what VoiceThread is?
VoiceThread,
sure.
Just because it involves the voice component, and I don't think I could do it as elegantly as you right now.
The way I would describe VoiceThread, it's basically a web-based application or a cloud application that allows you to upload a variety of different types of media sources, video being one of them, but also images, documents, PDF files, presentations. And so these thumbnails that you see over on the right here would be all these 4 thumbnails that Brad has illustrated on the right side of the screen. Those would be media files. So each one of those could be a different type of media file. And he's showing you basically a screenshot of this create stage, so how you create a voice thread. And when you create a voice thread, it basically asks you, where do you want to upload your media files from? And so you upload your media files, and Brad is showing you that you would just click on My Computer and upload, for example, your Hangout video, which is what's appeared over here in the upper right corner, and he would just select the MP4 from his computer and pull it in. And then he's also got some other presentation slides that are surrounding it. You can drag and drop those into order. When you've got all your media files into place, you share it with whoever you want. It can be shared securely. It can be shared with anyone who has the link. It can be shared publicly. And then anyone, the people you've selected who have access to it, can leave comments on those slides. And those comments can be left in video using a webcam, voice using a microphone, on your computer. They can also be left with an iPhone or an iPad, or they can be left in text, and they're asynchronous, which is really important. So it's an asynchronous voice, video, or text conversation around each of those media slides.
Exactly, exactly. And the key in this assignment was that required that they use either a voice or a video comment because for this particular group, they were practicing their voice. They were developing their voice as teachers. And they were also practicing and working on, explicitly working on exploratory talk with their peers and how that, and looking at how that facilitated learning for themselves and also for their peers. So
And
each of these
this
little,
is a
oh
shot
yeah,
of a still of the video uploaded into the VoiceThread
mm-hmm.
slide, and what you're
Yep,
seeing on the
right.
sides are all the avatars of the students who have commented, and you've just blurred out their faces. That's why it looks a little funny.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. So the ones who didn't have their faces, I just left their icons here. And then each of these little segments at the bottom here, if it's visible, is a voice comment. And if this were a live voice thread, I could hover with my cursor over the top of it, and it would give the name of the person who had made that comment. So that's one way in which it was possible to go and, see who had made a particular comment. So that's basically those are the different phases. Those were the mechanics of it. The challenge of it came is you could tell there are people here. So there were 4 of these, and each 4 had all the students who would needed to comment, which means that there were a lot of comments, and some of the students found it challenging to figure out, well, who's commenting, who's commenting on my comments, or who's responding to me, and so that took a little time to sort out, and for a while that got in the way, but overall in terms of outcomes, the quality of their interactions was very high, and I was very impressed when looking at it how they were able to engage with each other and push themselves to not just take the easy route, well, especially because they knew they were going to be graded on it, of course, but they took to it when the expectation was set explicitly to use this type of talk and to work towards engaging in this exploratory talk. They were able to do it, and they were able to use the virtual environment as a way to do it. So I'm going to come back. I know we're almost out of time.
So what kind of feedback, how did this, I mean, that all happened online virtually. So I'm just curious to know what the conversations were like face to face. What you talked about face to face, what those interactions were like. If all that was happening online, did you actually tie it back? Then did you actually, how did you spend your face to face time?
The face-to-face time.
Was it related? I mean,
This.
was there feedback given and kind of were the activities discussed?
We were moving. We were moving. That was a very, very end, and
Yeah.
um, it's it's hard to. I don't. It's funny. I'm just not remembering because it was long enough ago, and it was at the very end. But the in terms of the way that students reported their experience with it, they thought that it was something that was useful and that they were able to get the hang of. They did find that it was difficult to figure out. Again, logistically, it got complicated to figure out who they were supposed to
Yeah.
respond to and who was responding to them. I created a spreadsheet to help track it, and once that spreadsheet was set up,
Hmm.
it made it really easy for them, and I'll do that next time. But having meeting only once a week and not being able to resolve it face to face made it challenging because it was like an online
Right.
course. We had to figure it all out online.
Right.
And so that was challenging, and it also required a very high level of coordination and collaboration to make it happen. And
Sure.
it didn't take very much for things to get derailed. If one person didn't respond or was late responding, that could put a lot of people out of sync with the assignment deadline. So we had to adjust a couple times. It wasn't. That's what I think. That's where I was thinking of the flaming marshmallow in the food metaphor. There was one charred marshmallow, but it wasn't easy to get
Yeah.
the charcoal off and still make it tasty.
So did you get a sense of, did you get any kind of sense in terms of the students, I guess I'm thinking about your comment about them getting a taste and getting their arms around fostering the teaching, the peer teaching skills in a virtual setting. Did you get any sense of how they felt about how that went? Were they surprised with the technological experience of, you know, I mean, VoiceThread's a pretty unique tool in the sense that it delivers that voice, the asynchronous voice experience. Was there any feedback about that, how that fostered that type of interaction online? Did you get any kind of sense about how that type of feedback experience related to them, offered a relatedness between the group?
Um, no.
No. Okay.
I mean, it was hard. I think the feedback. I think it's harder work. I think it's more work. I think what you see when the expectation isn't set or the requirement to do that, to use voice or video, that the default is to go back to using text
Mm-hmm.
because it's easier. But the value isn't hard to see based on what you're able to observe and to hear.
Yeah.
Um, you know, we did several other VoiceThread exercises in the class,
Mm-hmm.
and it was useful at the very beginning of the course in developing a sense of community around some collaborative exercises that we did together.
Mm-hmm.
And those were, those were fun. So in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, being able to hear each other, that was fun, and being able to hear people's stories. They always come alive in a different way when it's verbal voice
Yeah.
versus text.
And that wasn't really one of your objectives. So do you feel like you've met your objectives successfully?
I think, yeah, I think so. I think that it will be having experienced the flaming marshmallows
Yeah.
part of it, that it'll be easier to make it a smoother experience next time, so
Sure.
that there won't be uh, the the frustrations that can happen. I mean, the frustrations are part of dealing with the emerging technologies and
Sure.
technologies in general, and small group work, whether it's face to face or happening in virtual space. But
Mm-hmm.
having some strategies to be able to take care of some of the management needs uh, will make it easier for it to be an enjoyable, or just, yeah, more enjoyable experience.
Great. Well, I thank you for sharing your everything, and the slides were really, really helpful. And I don't see any questions coming through, but we did have some folks share some screenshots on Twitter, so some of the visuals actually went through the Twitter feed, so that's great that they were shared there. This archive will be available on YouTube soon, and we'll be sharing it on the Faculty eCommons at facultyecommons.org, where you can go to learn more about the Learn with Michelle series and upcoming Hangouts and webinars. And Brad, I would like to thank you one more time for joining us today and sharing. Sharing is so very vital to innovation in higher education. So thank you, Brad. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'd like to say goodbye to everyone, and I'll see you next time for our next event. Take care.